Picture the most beautiful garden you've ever seen. Maybe it's the one 3 houses down from where you grew up, the yard where everything seemed to bloom a little brighter, a little fuller than anywhere else on the street. Hollyhocks leaning against a white picket fence, a stone path half swallowed by creeping ground cover, butterflies drifting between flower beds like they owned the place. You probably walked past that yard 100 times and thought, someday I want a garden just like that. Now imagine a county officer knocking on that same door with a $10,000 fine. That's not a hypothetical. That's Tuesday morning in dozens of American counties. And the plant that triggered it? It looked just as pretty, just as peaceful, just as innocent as everything else in that garden. No warning label, no skull and crossbones, just leaves, stems, and a legal nightmare growing quietly in the afternoon sun. Here's what nobody tells you when you walk into a garden center. Some of the most beautiful, most historically beloved, most edible plants in the world are also quietly illegal to grow in the United States. Not illegal the way you'd expect, not spiky, not dangerous looking, not obviously suspicious. We're talking about plants that your neighbors are growing right now without a clue. Plants that have been on dinner tables for generations, plants that grandmothers dried into tea and settlers pressed into medicine, and farmers planted for livestock across the American countryside. And today, every single one of them could land you in serious legal trouble. We're not talking about obscure technicalities buried in fine print nobody reads. We're talking active enforcement, real fines. In some states, criminal charges. One of the plants on this list gets people prosecuted for having the seeds. Another one, a leafy green sold in Asian grocery stores across the country, is classified as a potential ecological weapon in most states west of the Mississippi. And the one at number 1? It was deliberately planted by American government agencies for decades before they realized what they'd done. By then, it was already everywhere. Today, we're counting down 10 of the most innocent-looking plants that could get you fined, prosecuted, or ordered to tear apart the garden you spent years building. Some of these will surprise you, a few will genuinely shock you, and at least one of them, I'd bet money on it, is either growing in your yard right now, or it was growing there last season and you called it a weed. Each one has a story, a real story, of settlers and scientists, of good intentions and catastrophic mistakes, of plants that charmed their way into American soil before revealing exactly what they were capable of. Let's get into it. Here's the thing about dangerous plants. The truly dangerous ones don't look the part. We've been conditioned to think that if something is harmful, it announces itself. Thorns, bitter smell, an ugly, menacing silhouette, nature's warning labels. And for a lot of plants, that's true, but the ones we're talking about today never got that memo. They're soft, they're colorful, a few of them smell incredible. One has been described as the most beautiful flowering plant in a temperate garden. Another one looks so much like a common kitchen herb that people harvest it by mistake. That's what makes this list different from anything you've seen before. This isn't about poppies in a drug lord's field or exotic contraband smuggled across the border in a diplomatic pouch. This is about the legal gray zone, the murky, complicated, frustrating space where a plant can be perfectly legal to grow in one state and a finable offense 3 counties over. Where a seed packet you ordered online last spring might be sitting in your garage right now, flagged under your state's noxious weed statute. Where a flowering shrub that's been in your family's yard for 40 years might be on a mandatory removal list that nobody bothered to tell you about. That gray zone is bigger than most gardeners realize, and it's getting bigger every year. What changed? Partly science. Researchers have spent the last few decades mapping the full ecological impact of plants that were introduced with the best intentions. Plants brought over by settlers who wanted familiar food. Plants promoted by government agencies for erosion control. Plants sold in garden centers and aquarium shops before anyone understood what they'd do once they hit American soil. By the time the damage became undeniable, the plants were already established,
already spreading, already someone's beloved backyard feature. So states started legislating. County by county, region by region, they began drawing hard lines around plants that looked innocent but behaved like ecological bulldozers. The problem is that those laws are scattered, inconsistent, and almost completely unknown to the average home gardener. Nobody gets a pamphlet when they move into a new house. Nobody sends an alert when their state quietly adds a new species to the restricted list. You're just expected to know, and most people don't, not until the notice arrives. That's exactly why this video exists, because the gardeners who've been fined, and there are more of them than you'd think, weren't careless people. They were enthusiastic people, people who loved their yards, knew their plants by name, and had no idea they were breaking the law every time they watered their garden on a Sunday morning. 10 plants, 10 stories, and every single one of them will change the way you look at your own backyard. Let's count. Number 10, butterfly bush. Walk into almost any garden center in America and you'll find it, cascading purple and white flower spikes swaying in the breeze, covered with monarchs and swallowtails like something out of a nature documentary. The butterfly bush has been a staple of the American suburban garden for a century. Grandmothers planted it along fences, garden clubs gave it awards. It was literally marketed as a gift to pollinators, a way to help the very butterflies that conservation groups spend millions trying to protect. But the cruel irony nobody put on the label: butterfly bush attracts pollinators the same way a fast food restaurant attracts hungry travelers. It fills them up with something that has zero nutritional value and keeps them from finding the native plants that would actually sustain them. Meanwhile, the plant itself spreads aggressively, crowding out the native flowers that butterflies need to complete their life cycles. Oregon banned it outright. Washington and several other states have it on restricted lists with active removal campaigns. Gardeners who planted it in good faith, because a teenager at a garden center told them it was great for wildlife, have received formal notices ordering them to remove every last stem from their property. Number 9, English ivy. There is perhaps no plant more associated with dignity and permanence than English ivy. It climbs the walls of universities. It softens old stone fences. It was the ground cover of generations of landscapers who needed something elegant, evergreen, and virtually indestructible. And indestructible is exactly the problem. English ivy doesn't just grow, it consumes. It blankets forest floors so completely that native flowers can't germinate underneath it. It climbs trees and adds so much weight that mature hardwoods topple in storms that they would have easily survived otherwise. Ecologists call it a super spreader, and several states, including Oregon, Washington, and parts of the Pacific Northwest, have classified it as a Class C noxious weed. Some municipalities fine property owners who allow it to spread beyond their boundaries. The plant that made your front yard look like an Oxford courtyard is quietly dismantling the forest behind it.
Number 8, wisteria. Few plants have inspired more poetry, more wedding photographs, more dreamy Pinterest boards than wisteria. Those impossibly romantic cascades of lavender blooms dripping from pergolas and old farmhouse porches. It's the plant that makes people fall in love with gardening in the first place. In parts of Japan, people travel hours just to stand underneath a flowering wisteria canopy. But Asian wisteria, the variety most commonly sold in American nurseries, grows with a ferocity that has nothing to do with romance. It girdles trees, collapses structures, and smothers entire woodland edges. Multiple southeastern states have added it to invasive species watch lists, and several counties have begun issuing removal orders to homeowners whose wisteria has migrated beyond their property line. Your grandmother's most beloved plants. Your county's most wanted list. Number 7, mint. Yes, mint, the thing sitting in a terracotta pot on half the kitchen windowsills in America, the herb you muddle into mojitos, steep into tea, and chop over lamb on a Sunday afternoon. Mint has been grown in home gardens since before the United States existed. It's in every grocery store, every farmer's market, every backyard herb spiral built by an enthusiastic first-time gardener who watched too many YouTube videos. And in several states, letting it escape your garden is a finable offense. Here's what mint doesn't tell you when it's sitting there looking charming in its little pot. It spreads through underground runners with the single-minded aggression of a plant that has somewhere to be. Let it into open ground and it will colonize your entire yard, then your neighbor's yard, then the drainage ditch behind the neighborhood. Several municipalities with protected wetland corridors have added invasive mint species to their restricted plant ordinances. It won't land you in handcuffs, but it can absolutely land you in a dispute with your county's conservation office, and those disputes come with paperwork, deadlines, and dollar signs attached. Number 5. Mimosa tree. Pull up to any roadside in the American South between June and July and you'll see it. Those impossibly delicate pink powder puff blossoms lighting up the tree line like nature's own fireworks display. The mimosa tree was introduced from Asia in the 1700s and became one of the most romanticized trees in Southern garden history. Thomas Jefferson grew one at Monticello. Generations of children climbed their branches. The flowers are genuinely, breathtakingly beautiful. But the mimosa tree is now classified as a significant invasive species across at least 15 states. It colonizes roadsides, riverbanks, and forest edges with ruthless efficiency, displacing native trees and shrubs that entire ecosystems depend on. Several states carry active removal ordinances, and in Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, planting a new mimosa tree in certain zones isn't just frowned upon, it's a legal liability. The most photographed tree in rural southern backroads is quietly on probation. Number 4. Garlic mustard. This one will stop you cold, because garlic mustard looks exactly like what it sounds like, a modest leafy green with small white flowers and a mild garlicky bite that European settlers genuinely used in salads and cooked dishes for centuries. You can still find it growing along woodland trails in spring. It looks like something you'd see packaged at a specialty grocery store with a $9 price tag and an artisan label. It is listed as a prohibited noxious weed in multiple states. In some jurisdictions, knowingly cultivating or transporting it carries criminal penalties, not just civil fines. The mechanism is chemical warfare at a microscopic level. Garlic mustard releases compounds into the soil that systematically destroy the fungal networks native trees depend on to survive. A salad green, treated like a controlled substance. The stakes just changed. Number 3. Kudzu vine. If you've driven through the American South, you already know what kudzu looks like. That relentless green blanket swallowing telephone poles, abandoned houses, and entire hillsides like the landscape is being slowly erased. What most people don't know is that kudzu arrived in America as a celebrated miracle plant. The government didn't just allow it, they paid farmers to plant it. During the Great Depression and Dust Bowl, kudzu was promoted as a salvation crop, the leaves rich in protein, the roots processable into flour, the whole plant capable of stopping soil erosion in its tracks. Indigenous communities in Asia had harvested and cooked kudzu for centuries. The roots were a legitimate food source. The plant had genuine, documented culinary and medicinal value that made the enthusiasm around it completely understandable. Then it grew a foot per day and swallowed 7 million acres of the South whole. Today, it's federally listed as a noxious weed, banned in most states, and the people who knowingly plant it face serious civil penalties. The government that once handed out kudzu seedlings like party favors now funds multi-million-dollar eradication programs trying to undo what it started. Number 2. Purslane. Here is where the irony becomes almost unbearable. Purslane is one of the most nutritious plants on Earth, more omega-3 fatty acids than almost any other leafy green, rich in vitamins A, C, and E, eaten across the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Asia for thousands of years. It grows in sidewalk cracks and garden beds without being invited, which means millions of Americans are yanking it out by the roots every summer, throwing away a superfood while paying $12 for kale at the farmer's market. And several states list it as a regulated invasive weed with removal requirements that carry real financial penalties. Our ancestors ate it to survive. We fine people for growing it. Number 1 is next, and nothing could have prepared us.
Number 1. English chamomile. Take a breath, because this one is going to hurt. Picture a summer afternoon in a cottage garden somewhere in rural America, maybe Ohio, maybe Vermont, maybe a small plot of land in the Carolina foothills that's been in the same family for 4 generations. There's a woman kneeling in the dirt, the way her mother knelt before her and her grandmother before that. She's harvesting tiny white daisy-like flowers with yellow centers, pinching each one off gently at the stem, dropping them into a wicker basket. The smell rising from that basket is one of the most comforting smells in the natural world. Warm, slightly sweet, honeyed, and familiar in a way that reaches something deep and old in your memory. She's going to dry those flowers and steep them into tea, the same tea her family has been drinking for 100 years to calm an upset stomach, ease a restless night, soothe a sick child. Chamomile. The most gentle, the most domestic, the most grandmotherly plant in the entire history of the American garden. In parts of Washington state, growing it without understanding your county's specific land use ordinances can trigger agricultural violations. In several western states, wild-spreading chamomile populations have been added to noxious weed watch lists that give local authorities the power to mandate removal and issue escalating fines for non-compliance. There are documented cases of small homestead growers receiving cease and desist orders for chamomile patches that self-seeded beyond their designated growing areas into protected land corridors. Read that again. Cease and desist orders for chamomile. Not because it's toxic, not because it's hallucinogenic, not because it produces anything more dangerous than a warm cup of tea on a cold evening, but because in the ruthlessly complicated legal patchwork of American land use law, even the most innocent plant becomes a liability the moment it crosses the wrong boundary, spreads into the wrong ecosystem, or grows in the wrong county at the wrong time under the wrong set of regulations written by people who have probably never knelt in a garden in their lives. That woman with the wicker basket isn't a criminal, she's a gardener. She's the continuation of a tradition that stretches back centuries, a tradition of growing, harvesting, healing, and feeding the people she loves from the ground beneath her own feet. She isn't breaking the spirit of any law ever written, but the letter of the law, in the wrong jurisdiction, on the wrong afternoon, with the wrong inspector driving past, that's a different story entirely. And that is exactly what makes chamomile number 1 on this list. Not because it's the most invasive, not because it's the most ecologically destructive, but because no plant better captures the painful, maddening truth at the heart of everything we've covered today. The most dangerous garden in America might just be the most beautiful one on your street. So here's where we started. A sun-drenched garden, a white picket fence, butterflies drifting between flower beds on a quiet afternoon. The kind of yard that makes you slow down when you drive past it. The kind that makes you think, someday I want something just like that. That image hasn't changed. The garden is still beautiful, the flowers are still blooming. The person who planted it still loves every inch of it with the same devotion their grandparents had and their grandparents before them. None of that changed. What changed is what you now know about what might be growing inside it. Because here's the truth that 10 plants and 7 chapters have been building toward. The truth that nobody in the gardening industry, nobody at the garden center, and nobody on the seed packet will ever tell you directly. The most dangerous things in your garden don't have thorns. They don't smell toxic. They don't look sinister from the road. The most dangerous things in your garden have lawyers. They have legislators. They have county ordinances written in language so dense and so inconsistent that even the people enforcing them sometimes can't agree on what they mean. And they look absolutely stunning in June.
This is the part of gardening that nobody romanticizes, the part where passion meets paperwork, where heritage meets legislation, where a plant your great-grandmother pressed into a family recipe book becomes evidence in a municipal violation notice. It isn't fair. For a lot of these plants and the people who love them, it genuinely isn't fair. But it is real, and the gardeners who know it are the ones who never have to find out the hard way. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment right now. Tell me which plant on this list genuinely shocked you. Was it the chamomile, the butterfly bush, the elderberry that fed families through 2 world wars and now needs a permit? I read every single comment, and I want to know which one stopped you cold. If this video made you look at your backyard differently, if you're already mentally walking through your garden trying to remember what's growing along the back fence, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is exactly what this channel is about. The real stories behind the plants, the history, the science, and yes, the law. The things that turn an ordinary afternoon in the garden into something genuinely worth understanding. And if you think 10 plants was surprising, the next video on your screen right now covers the heirloom vegetables your great-grandparents grew that have completely vanished from modern gardening. Plants with extraordinary flavor, extraordinary history, and extraordinary reasons why nobody talks about them anymore. Trust me, you'll want to see that one. The garden is waiting. Now you know what's really growing in it.